The 9,542nd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is threats to international peace and security. The agenda is adopted. I should like to take this opportunity to pay tribute on behalf of the Council to His Excellency Mr. Nicolas de Rivière, Permanent Representative of France, for his service as President of the Council for the month of January. I am sure I speak for all members of the Council in expressing deep appreciation to Ambassador de Rivière and his team for the great diplomatic skill with which they conducted the Council's business last month. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Iraq, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the Syrian Arab Republic to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Rosemarie DiCarlo, Under Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Rosemarie DiCarlo.
Thank you, Madam President. As we are all too aware, the tensions that have engulfed multiple countries in the Middle East continue to rise. Tragically, this comes as no surprise. The Secretary General has repeatedly warned about the risks of further escalation and miscalculation in the region since the horrific Hamas attacks on Israel on 7 October and the devastating Israeli counteroffensive in Gaza. Since early October 2023, we have witnessed near-daily incidents in the region. These include some 165 attacks on United States facilities in Syria and Iraq, prompting U.S. strikes in the two countries. Then, on 28 January, a drone attack killed 3 U.S. service members and injured 40 at a U.S. base known as Tower 22 in northeast Jordan near Al-Tanf base in Syria. On 2 February, the U.S. Central Command said it had carried out 85 airstrikes in Iraq and Syria against reported Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, Quds forces, and affiliated groups. Syria and Iraq condemned the 2 February strikes, with both governments claiming they had resulted in deaths and injured civilians. The United States said it had targeted command and control operations, intelligence centers, and weapons facilities, among other sites, and that it was not seeking conflict in the Middle East or elsewhere. While the Iraqi government has continued to repeat its commitment to protecting U.S. and coalition forces inside Iraq, some armed factions linked to the Islamic resistance in Iraq have pledged to continue their attacks against U.S. and coalition forces in the region. Madam President, the wave of violence since early October involves a large swath of the Middle East. The Israeli Defense Forces and Hezbollah, along with other non-state armed groups in Lebanon, have exchanged fire across the Blue Line on almost daily basis since 8 October. There have been repeated rocket fire over the occupied Golan between Israel and militias reportedly linked to Iran, as well as airstrikes attributed to Israel by the government of Syria on multiple locations in Syria. Ongoing Houthi drone and missile attacks and threats to navigation in the Red Sea are deeply worrying and risk both exacerbating the conflict and further impacting international trade as companies divert ships away from critical maritime routes. A report on Houthi attacks on merchant and commercial vessels in the Red Sea will be shortly before the Council in accordance with Resolution 2722. Since 11 January, the United States and the United Kingdom with the backing of 6 other member states, have launched strikes on Houthi positions in Yemen. Strikes have occurred consecutively over the last 3 days. More than 36 targets across 13 locations were reportedly struck on 3 February, including what was described as underground storage facilities, command and control sites, missile systems, UAV storage and operations sites, radars, and helicopters. An additional missile launch site was reportedly hit on 4 February. Today, sites in Hodeidah were also targeted, including some very close to United Nations offices on the ground. Madam President, I reiterate the Secretary General's call on all parties to step back from the brink and to consider the unbearable human and economic cost of a potential regional conflict. It's been nearly 5 months since more than 1,200 Israelis were killed in the attacks by Hamas, with over 250 people taken hostage. As the Secretary General said, this has been a period of heartache and anguish for Israelis, and I echo the Secretary General's call for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. The past 5 months have also been heartbreaking and catastrophic for Palestinian civilians in Gaza, where hunger is rampant, disease is spreading, and shelter is squalid at best for a vast number of people. The death toll in the Strip is reported to have surpassed 27,000, mostly women and children. Thousands more are reported missing. The civilian population of Gaza should not pay for the terror unleashed by Hamas. I reiterate the Secretary General's call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. The risk of escalation in the Middle East and its potential consequences was obvious from 7 October. A quick survey of the agenda of this Council explains why. The UN is supporting political and peace processes throughout the region, in countries emerging or still suffering from armed conflict. The Middle East remains highly volatile. Long-term regional stability demands the implementation of a clear political roadmap in each of these situations. The Secretary General continues his extensive outreach to all key stakeholders to urge all parties to take concrete measures to de-escalate tensions and to work towards sustainable political solutions that aim to resolve, rather than merely manage, long-standing conflicts. I appeal to the Council to continue to actively engage all concerned parties to prevent further escalation and the worsening of tensions that undermine regional peace and security. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Ms. DiCarlo for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
President, we would like to thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing. We heard quite a lot of heuristics from her, but we didn't hear the main thing from her. Of course, a condemnation of a violation of international law by the United States and the UK. We'd like to thank the Guyanese Presidency for swiftly convening today's meeting of the UN Security Council under threats to international peace and security, which we initiated in order to discuss another unlawful and irresponsible act of the United States in the region of the Middle East against the backdrop of an escalation of violence in the Palestinian-Israel conflict zone with an unprecedented number of casualties, in support of which Washington is playing far from a secondary role. And the night from the 2nd to the 3rd of February, the US, using 4 tactical bombers of the US Air Force, F-16, and 2 supersonic strategic bombers, B-1B Lancers, carried out by order of President Joe Biden no less than 85 so-called retaliation strikes on the territory of sovereign Iraq and Syria. The mass airstrikes of American air forces, as a result of which civilians and soldiers died, caused the destruction and damage of tens of facilities. And this demonstrates once again to the entire world the aggressive nature of US policy in the Middle East and the full disregard of Washington for norms of international law. The participation in the US attacks of the UK RAF should give no one the illusion that there is some sort of international coalition in place. London still has to respond for its zealous support of serious provocational attacks of its big brother in Washington, and also the ongoing attacks against Yemen. The actions of the Anglo-Saxons pose a direct threat to international peace and security. They undermine the world order based on the primacy of universal international law and the central role of the United Nations. Perhaps this kind of mob-like action is part of the so-called rules-based order.
Ведь, как недавно в своем интервью сказал бывший посол Австралии в Иране Джон Блендер, это, цитирую, набор постоянно меняющихся, постоянно колеблющихся правил, разработанных Соединенными Штатами в интересах Соединенных Штатов и их западных союзников. Конец цитаты. Добавив, что, цитирую, одна из самых сложных вещей в порядке, основанном на правилах, это выяснить, в чем заключаются эти правила. Конец цитаты. Поскольку именно на соблюдение этого выгодного Соединенным Штатами и их союзниками порядка и настаивают Соединенные Штаты, оправдывая в том числе свои удары по Ираку и Сирии, становится еще более очевидно, что к международному праву эта американская псевдоправовая конструкция не имеет никакого отношения.
Legal construct has little to do with international law.
Господа председатели, очевидно, что американские авиаудары специально рассчитаны на дальнейшее разжигание конфликта. Их целями стали объекты и позиции вооруженных сил Сирийской Арабской Республики на востоке страны, преимущественно провинции Дейр-эз-Зор, где сирийские военные продолжают упорную борьбу с недобитыми идильцами, которым Вашингтон, вопреки своим заявлениям, на деле обеспечивает опеку и покровительство. Практически без пауз атакуют в последнее время объекты, как утверждается, проиранских группировок в Ираке и Сирии. Соединенные Штаты пытаются целенаправленно втянуть в общерегиональный конфликт крупнейшие страны Ближнего Востока. При этом представители Сент-Кома заявляли, что их так называемая операция координировалась с властями Ирака. Однако в заявлении иракских властей действия Соединенных Штатов названы очередной вопиющей агрессией и нарушением суверенитета Ирака. А информация Вашингтона о якобы имевшей место координации ударов с Багдадом преднамеренной ложью, направленной на искажение общественного мнения и уход от юридической ответственности. Очевидно, что присутствие международной антиидиловской коалиции во главе США в республике стало угрозой для безопасности и стабильности страны, а также попытка ее вовлечения в региональные и международные конфликты. Вашингтон, уверовав в свою безнаказанность, продолжает сеять разрушение и хаос на Ближнем Востоке. Крупнейшая с 2003 года авиационная операция Соединенных Штатов в регионе, подаваемая Джо Байденом как акт возмездия за атаку с применением БПЛА неустановленного происхождения по незаконно находящейся в Сирии американской базе,
American base that is illegally in Syria has no justification. We see in these attempts to flex muscles, mainly to try and implement the domestic political situation in America, to justify and salvage the image of the current American administration on the international arena in the light of the upcoming and presidential pre-election campaign. And also the fact that these acts could lead to a further escalation of international tensions and led to the deaths of civilians is not of concern to Washington strategists. Recent events confirm that the US is not looking for and has never sought in reality a solution to the problems in the region. The logic of their actions should be found only in their effort at any price to preserve their dominating position in the world. Therefore, Washington has tried and will continue to try to fight fire with fire and compound the chronic disagreements within the Middle East to such an extent where it is a benefit for the Israeli ally. Trusting on any good sense from the American establishment and the readiness to take into account the interests of the countries in the region is something that is pointless. On the 2nd and the 3rd of February, we were able to see this once again. We decisively condemned this new brazen act of aggression of the US against a sovereign state, creating further risks and increasing the level of instability in a region that is already on fire. And it is clear that this incident, which we are here discussing today, only increases regional tensions caused by unprecedented violence in Gaza, which for more 4 months have been suffering from an inhumane bloody operation of Israel, who the US is covering through all their efforts, as well as their satellites, including blocking efforts of the Security Council to impose an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Ultimately, we can clearly see that escalation of violence has already gone far beyond the occupied Palestinian territories, crossing not only the border between Israel and Lebanon, but also to the Red Sea and Yemen. It's clear that unilateral acts of violence by Washington and their allies only worsen the chaos in the region, nullifying international efforts to re-establish peace in the Middle East and to find a just solution to the Palestinian question. We call on the international community to unequivocally condemn these senseless acts of Washington and its allies in the Middle East, which violate the sovereignty of Iraq and the Syrian Arab Republic. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for convening this meeting. We also want to thank USG DiCarlo for our informative briefing. We welcome the participation of the permanent representatives of Syria, Iran, and Iraq to this meeting. Sierra Leone is deeply concerned about the recent developments in the Middle East, with the killing of 3 U.S. military personnel in Jordan on Sunday, 28 January 2024. In this regard, we strongly condemn the unprovoked attacks on and killing of the 3 U.S. military personnel. The attacks have led to retaliatory airstrikes by the United Nations against targets in Iraq and Syria. While we note the UN Charter provision on the right to self-defense, which is available to member states of the United Nations to respond to such unprovoked attacks, we urge for a measured response in line with international law. We particularly call for calm and de-escalation from all parties involved in order not to escalate tensions or further jeopardize the stability of the region. The attack on U.S. personnel and the subsequent response has a potential to further escalate or be used as a pretext to escalate ongoing conflicts in the region. There cannot be any justification for the unprovoked attacks and the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. With that said, war in Gaza and the humanitarian crisis looms large in the region. In this vein, Sierra Leone reiterates its call for humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza and for dialogue by all relevant stakeholders in the region in order to avoid further military escalation. We urge all parties to prioritize the well-being of civilians and to pursue the escalation through diplomatic and peaceful resolution. Madam President, our call for de-escalation is to avoid a spillover of the conflict in Gaza to the wider Middle East region. As alluded to already, there are serious incidents in the Red Sea and Yemen, as well as rising tensions in the Israel and Lebanon border. In light of these recent developments, Sierra Leone urgently calls on relevant stakeholders and parties to work with the UN in the spirit of cooperation, humanity, and diplomacy to prevent further deterioration in the humanitarian and security situation in the Middle East region. In conclusion, Sierra Leone calls for de-escalation and a renewed commitment to the principles of international law, peaceful conflict resolution, and avoidance of taking actions that could further worsen insecurity and human suffering. Collectively, let us strive to promote stability and enduring peace in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I thank Under Secretary General DiCarlo for her briefing We welcome the presence of the representative of Iraq and Syria at today's meeting. I look forward to further details from their statements later in the meeting. The recent U.S. airstrikes on multiple locations in Syria and Iraq have caused heavy casualties. Those acts constitute a grave violation of the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria and Iraq. The United States has indicated that relevant military operations will continue. China expresses its serious concern over this situation. We oppose any acts that violate the UN Charter and infringe upon the territorial sovereignty and security of other countries. As we speak, the situation in the Middle East is on the verge of extreme peril. Easing tensions and preventing the escalation of conflicts are pressing tasks facing the international community. Confronted with this complex situation, we must be clear on the following questions. Who is creating threats, whether in the Middle East or elsewhere? Who is engaged in the excessive use of force, and who is misleading public opinion? On those issues, we must respect facts, uphold justice, and abide by principles. It is simply not right to let the loudest voice set the tone, or let the strongest fist have the final say. In fact, everything that has unfolded recently has already revealed the true answers. Now, with respect to the topic under discussion, the United States claims that its actions were in response to the attacks on the U.S. military and for safeguarding its own security. Iraq and Syria, however, have already voiced strong rejection and condemnation. The U.S. purports that it does not seek to create conflicts in the Middle East or anywhere else, but in reality, it does precisely the opposite. The U.S. military actions are undoubtedly stoking new turmoil in this region and further intensifying tensions. History has repeatedly shown that military means is not a solution, and that the excessive use of force will only lead to bigger crises. The U.S. actions will certainly exacerbate the vicious cycle of tit-for-tat violence in the Middle East. We have witnessed too many examples and precedents in this regard. We urge relevant parties to remain calm, exercise restraint, earnestly abide by the Charter of the United Nations and international law, respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of other countries, cease illegal military operations, and prevent regional situation from further escalation or even spiraling out of control. It must be pointed out that underneath the rising tensions in the Middle East over the past few months, the fundamental reason is the failure to implement a ceasefire in Gaza. China has repeatedly emphasized that an immediate ceasefire in Gaza is a critical overriding prerequisite for everything else and a top priority for international diplomatic efforts. All parties should heed the strong call and overwhelming consensus of the international community and support the Security Council in taking strong actions to promote an immediate ceasefire, save lives, alleviate humanitarian catastrophes, and contain any spillover of the conflict. We call on the country concerned to demonstrate political will and determination, take more practical actions to safeguard regional peace and stability, make less selfish geopolitical calculations, and play a constructive role that is expected of it. Madam President, today's world is becoming increasingly dangerous, and international peace and security are facing grave challenges. We are now standing at a critical crossroads. At stake is the fate and future of our world. China believes that in a world facing interlocking changes and chaos, we must uphold the sense of a community with a shared future for mankind and fully recognize that all countries have a shared destiny and an interdependent future. We are all in the same boat. The security of one country cannot be achieved at the expense of that of others. All countries must stay committed to maintaining common security, achieving common development, and building a common future. We must adhere to true multilateralism, preserve the core role of the United Nations, build a multipolar world with equality and order, promote an inclusive and universal preferential economic globalization, and jointly build a world of lasting peace and universal security. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I would like to congratulate you and Guyana for presiding over the Council during February. And I assure you about Algeria's full support. Let me also say our admiration to the Ambassador de Rivière and his able team for the successful chairmanship of the Security Council last month. Our appreciation goes to Madame Di Carlo for her insightful briefing. The Middle East stands at the precipice of collapse. The recent airstrike targeting Iraq and Syria over the weekend are likely to further exacerbate the already precarious situation. It may potentially lead toward a further escalation, and in this context, we reaffirm our steady support for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and security of both Iraq and Syria. The brotherly people of Syria and Iraq deserve to live in peace and prosperity. Madam President, in light of these critical circumstances, we urge for restraint and avoidance of any escalation. The region cannot bear the burden of additional tensions, and we firmly believe that force is not and will never be the means for peace and stability. History attests that force only causes ruin, instability, and fosters animosity. Today, we advocate for dialogue and collective action to bridge differences and foster shared prosperity. Let us set aside notion of violence, deterrence, or punishment, and let us work hand in hand toward an appeased Middle East. Madam President, genuine stability in the Middle East necessitates a comprehensive addressing of the root causes that underpin instability. We must invest in long-term solutions to prevent further suffering and pave the way for lasting peace in the region. The Palestinian question stands as the cornerstone for this endeavor. From the outset of aggression against the Palestinian people, particularly in the Gaza Strip. My country, Algeria, on many occasions sounded the alarm on the risk of regional spillover. Regrettably, the situation has evolved into a devastating reality, compelling us to redouble our effort to halt the escalation across the entire region. The peoples of this region, like all inhabitants in the world, yearn for peace, yearn for development, and yearn for prosperity. It is high time for this cradle of civilization to reclaim its stability. The initial stride toward this goal lies in an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Under-Secretary General De Carlo, for your briefing. The United Kingdom fully supports all efforts to maintain and enhance international peace and security, including in Iraq and Syria. We are committed to de-escalating tensions in the Middle East. We condemn the multiple attacks since October 2023 by Iran-aligned militant groups against the global coalition and Iraqi military bases in Syria and Iraq. Despite warnings, those strikes have continued and intensified, with an attack on the 26th of January killing 3 American personnel and injuring many more. We fully support the US right to self-defense and their right to respond. Daesh continue to pose a grave threat to those countries and to the wider region, and conducted its biggest attack in years last month in Iran. Its ability to direct, enable, and inspire attacks continues to represent one of the most significant global terrorist threats. And the sole objective of the global coalition, of which the UK is a leading member, is to counter Daesh. The UK remains committed to working with our counter-terror partners in Iraq and Syria to tackle the threat from Daesh and to prevent their resurgence. President, Iran's political, financial and military support to militant groups is destabilizing the region and threatens our collective ability to counter Daesh. So we call on the regime to rein in these groups and to act now to prevent further attacks by its proxies and partners in Iraq, Syria and Yemen. As I said earlier, we are committed to de-escalation of regional tension. President, the Houthis' continued attacks on commercial and military vessels in the Red Sea are illegal and unacceptable. This Council was clear in Resolution 2722 that we condemn Houthi attacks and call on them to stop. This Council has supported international efforts to enhance protection of shipping in the Red Sea. Our actions and presence in the Red Sea are designed to protect innocent lives, preserve freedom of navigation, and deter further attacks on shipping. We acted alongside our US allies and with the support of many international partners in self-defense and in accordance with the rule of law. We are committed to working with all members of this Council and the international community to protect international peace and security in the Middle East and throughout the world. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. Allow me to thank Ambassador de Riviere for France's chairmanship of the Security Council for the month of January. I also wish to convey Malta's support to Guyana for your presidency for this month. I thank USG De Carlo for her briefing. As we have stated on various occasions, the situation in the Middle East remains deeply concerning. We are also deeply troubled about the fact that instability in the Middle East is being exploited by militias and armed groups to engage in activities that continue to compound this difficult and fragile context. The rapidly deteriorating maritime security situation in the Red Sea is a case in point. We reiterate our call on the Houthis to immediately cease any attacks and underline the need to avoid any further escalations as outlined in Resolution 2722. The navigational rights and freedoms of commercial vessels in the Red Sea is of paramount importance. These rights must be respected and assured. President, on this occasion, we urge all parties to combat the malign influence of all bad actors and to refrain from actions which could contribute to a wider war. The importance of protecting civilian lives remains paramount. The international community and this Council must focus on rapidly working towards addressing the root causes of the region's tensions and promote avenues towards a just and lasting peace based on relevant UN resolutions and international law. Acts of terrorism have often been used to exacerbate tensions, and we simply cannot allow that the current very tense situation is disrupted by people not operating in good faith. We believe that the UNSC has a key role to play in this regard, and we will continue to support initiatives to hold these spoilers to account. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Undersecretary General De Carlo, for your briefing. Colleagues, on February 2nd, and at President Biden's direction, the United States conducted precision airstrikes on February 2 in Iraq and Syria against Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and affiliated militia groups. This necessary and proportionate action was taken in exercise of the United States' inherent right of self-defense as reflected in Article 51 of the UN Charter. Less than a week ago, on January 28, Iran-aligned militia groups in Iraq attacked a Jordanian facility hosting U.S. forces taking part in the fight against ISIS-Daesh. 3 U.S. service members lost their lives that day, and many others were wounded. This loss is devastating. This is unacceptable, and attacks like it cannot continue. Colleagues, Russia called this meeting under the false pretense that the United States has no ground to respond to attacks that have killed U.S. personnel. It bears repeating, therefore, that the actions U.S. forces took on February 2 are necessary and proportionate, consistent with international law, and in exercise of the United States' inherent right to self-defense. We also repeatedly stated in previous letters to this Council that the United States would take further action to respond to future attacks or threats of attack against U.S. nationals and U.S. personnel and facilities. These recent strikes certainly fall into that category. They are aimed at protecting and defending U.S. personnel, including those in Jordan, who are supporting operations against ISIS to ensure the terrorist group can never resurge. The strike successfully degraded the capabilities of Iranian-backed militias, deterring and undermining their ability to conduct further attacks. The facilities struck included command and control operations and intelligence centers, rockets, missiles, and unmanned aerial vehicle storage, and logistics and munition supply chain facilities. The IRGC and affiliated militias have used these facilities to attack U.S. and coalition forces. These targets were carefully selected to avoid civilian casualties and based on clear irrefutable evidence that they were connected to attacks on U.S. personnel in the region. President Biden has made clear that these strikes were the start of our response to the deadly attack on Tower 22 in northeastern Jordan. I also want to stress that these strikes are separate and distinct from the coalition strikes in Yemen, which were in response to the Iranian-backed Houthis' lawless attacks on naval vessels and international shipping in the Red Sea. Let me be clear. The United States does not desire more conflict in a region when we are actively working to contain and de-escalate the conflict in Gaza. And we are not seeking a direct conflict with Iran. But we will continue to defend our personnel against unacceptable attacks, period. The U.S. and coalition forces are deployed in our shared effort to ensure the enduring defeat of ISIS. As we have reported in numerous letters to the Security Council President, since October 18, Iran-aligned militia groups have attacked those forces in Iraq, Syria, and now Jordan over 165 times. 165 times. Iran has provided support for many of these attacks, which were similar to the one on January 28. Many of them have resulted in casualties, including among our Iraqi partners. The United States has repeatedly, and in some instances directly, warned Iran about attacks on U.S. personnel. And yet, Iran has failed to rein in its extremist proxies. On the contrary, Iran continues to escalate tensions across the region by enabling these proxies' deadly attacks. Iran cannot deny its role in enabling these attacks against U.S. forces or its responsibility for this escalation. And so, we call on every member of this Council, and especially those with direct channels to Iran, to press Iran's leaders to rein in their militias and stop these attacks. They should also press the Syrian regime to stop giving Iran a platform to destabilize the region. Colleagues, as President Biden has made clear, we will not hesitate to defend our personnel and hold responsible all those who harm Americans. That certainly goes for Iran and its proxies. And so we will continue to exercise our right to self-defense at a time and a place of our choosing. We will continue to hold Iran and its affiliates accountable for their destabilizing actions. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement, and I now give the floor to the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. I also thank U.S. Secretary Carlon for her timely briefing. At the outset, my delegation expresses its serious concern about the regional escalation since the heinous terrorist attacks by Hamas and Israel's subsequent military operations in the Gaza Strip. Houthis have continued their indiscriminate attacks on merchant and commercial vessels, jeopardizing the free flow of commerce in the Red Sea. The saber-rattling situation across the blue line between Israel and Lebanon is ongoing. Further destabilizing this combustible situation, militant groups in Iraq and Syria have launched a series of attacks against the U.S. and coalition forces in the region. Even the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad was targeted by such rocket attacks in December of last year, and these attacks have led to U.S. forces strikes in response. We call on militant groups in the region to cease their provocative actions, which undermine regional security and stability. In this regard, we take note of the measures taken by the U.S. to limit the risk of escalation in defending their personnel and the facilities. Simultaneously, we note with appreciation that relevant parties in the region have expressed their willingness to avoid an escalation of conflict. Madam President, over the last weekend, the U.S. and U.K. conducted military operations in response to the continued threats posed by the Houthis, despite the adoption of the Security Council Resolution 2722, urging the Houthis to stop their attacks in the Red Sea. The situation in Israel and Gaza remains grave, carrying high risk of spillover to other parts of the region. Above all at this volatile moment, when miscalculation can unintendedly lead to a tinderbox, any attempts to politically exploit the situation and risk regional stability are unacceptable. What is needed at this juncture is to focus on and support diplomacy to enhance regional security and foster safer trade and flow of energy. In recent years, we have witnessed significant achievements in the political and security areas made by the Iraqi people, and these achievements need to be upheld and expanded. At the same time, as the current security and humanitarian situation in Syria remain extremely dire, the UN and humanitarian agencies' engagement should be ramped up to deliver life-saving humanitarian assistance. We also echo the Iraqi government's statement that the recent regional developments not only jeopardize the global economy but also undermine regional efforts to combat ISIS. We must not forget the unthinkable terror and the cataclysm that ISIS inflicted on the region from 2014. We vividly saw that ISIS threats remain ongoing as they claim the responsibility for the deadly bombing in the city of Kerman, Iran last month. The risk of resurgence of ISIS still remains in the region, as the Secretary General assessed in his latest report. In this connection, the recent attacks of militant groups against the U.S. and coalition forces threaten to undermine the ongoing efforts to combat ISIS in the region. In conclusion, the Republic of Korea will make efforts to support diplomacy and prevent far-reaching spillover in the region and beyond. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President.
Tomo nota y agradezco
We take note of the information provided by USG de Carlo, and we thank her for that information. And we also recognize the presence in this chamber with us of
Mi
representatives from
delegación
Syria,
expresa
Iran,
su preocupación
and
ante
Iraq.
la escalada de violencia de las últimas
My
semanas
country
en
is
Medio Oriente,
concerned by the
que se
escalation of
configura como una
violence in
grave
recent weeks
amenaza
in the
a la
Middle
paz y
East. It
seguridad
is a serious
internacionales
threat to
y
international peace and
coloca en
security,
situación de
and
riesgo
it puts
la vida
the
e
lives and the
integración
physical integrity
e
of the
integridad de la
civilian
población
population
civil.
at
El
risk.
Consejo de Seguridad tiene una
The Security
responsabilidad
Council
clave en
has
esta
a key
materia y para
responsibility
sentar las
in
bases
this
de una
matter
paz
to lay the
sostenible
foundation
en
for
la región.
sustainable peace in
Los
the region.
ataques del pasado 2
The
de
attacks
febrero en
on the
varias
2nd of
ciudades de Irak y
February
Siria
on a
en
number of
respuesta al
cities in
asalto
Iraq
ocurrido el
and
28 de
Syria in
enero pasado en
retaliation for the
Jordania
attack
han
on
cobrado la
January
vida
28th in
de
Jordan
decenas de
have
civiles
cost
y
the lives of
militares.
dozens of
Ecuador pide
civilians and
contención a
military
todas las
personnel.
partes y
Ecuador would
recuerda
call on
la
all
obligación
parties
de
to show
actuar de
restraint and
conformidad con
reminds
lo
them
previsto en el derecho
of the
internacional, en la
need to
Carta de
comply
Naciones
with the
Unidas y las
provisions of
resoluciones
international law, the
pertinentes de
UN
este
Charter, and
Consejo.
relevant resolutions of
Ecuador
this Council.
se une al llamado a la
Ecuador
moderación
echoes
del secretario
the Secretary
general
General's
que insta a todas
appeal
las
for
partes
restraint and
involucradas
in
a cesar
urging
el
all
fuego
parties
y a
involved to
privilegiar la
cease
vía
fire
política y diplomática
and to turn
para
to
solventar
diplomatic
este
and
momento
political
crítico.
means for
Mi país
resolving these
también
differences at this
alienta
critical
todo
juncture.
esfuerzo
My
tendiente
delegation
a la
also
reducción de las
encourages any
tensiones
effort aimed
y
at
hace un llamado
de-escalation of
a las
tensions,
partes
and we
a
appeal to the
abstenerse
parties
de
to
ejecutar
abstain
cualquier acción
from
de
pursuing
cualquier carácter
any
que exacerbe
action
aún más
which might
la
further
delicada
exacerbate
situación
the
en Medio
delicate
Oriente.
situation in the Middle East.
Concluyo,
I would
señora
conclude,
presidenta,
Madam President,
reafirmando
by
la
reaffirming
urgencia
the
de
urgent
también
need
desplegar esfuerzos coordinados
for
a
us
escala regional y
to
global
work together
para
regionally
profundizar la
and
lucha contra el
globally
terrorismo,
to further
recautelar la
combat
protección de
terrorism, to ensure
civiles
the
y
protection of
priorizar los
civilians,
esfuerzos
and to make
para
every effort
garantizar
to
el
guarantee
acceso de
access
ayuda humanitaria.
for humanitarian
Gracias,
aid.
presidente.
Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I give the floor now to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Madam President. First, I want to congratulate you, Madam President, and your country, Guyana, for assuming the presidency of the Council for this month. And we have full trust that you'll be our North Star in the difficult discussions that you're going to have in February, and that you'll guide us through the month. I also want to thank France and the Ambassador de Rivière and his team for the leadership that they provided during the month of January. I would also like to thank Undersecretary Rosemary DiCarlo for her briefing. With each passing day, the situation in the Middle East is becoming more volatile. We have a growing feeling of powerlessness against increasing spillover of the Gaza conflict into the wider region. The coalition's presence in Iraq is under growing threat from intensified attacks, which could undo the progress achieved in the country. Meanwhile, the situation in Syria is deteriorating with more violence and tension in the northwest and northeast. We are gravely concerned about this cycle of violence that is causing numerous civilian casualties. And we wish to recall that international law must be respected by all, and the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure must be ensured at all times and in any circumstances. We continue to believe that our best hope to stop the spiral of violence, to start restoring calm in the wider region, is to restore calm in Gaza. Call it as you like, but the bombing, the shelling, the killing in Gaza, as well as attacks on Israel, must stop. Hostages must be released, and urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance for Gazans must be restored in full. We urge all actors in the region to exert utmost restraint and to work towards de-escalation. We also call on those countries who can exert influence on non-state groups to do so. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me begin by expressing our appreciation to USG DiCarlo for the informative briefing. I have listened carefully to the explanation by the US on this matter. Japan notes the US stated that it carried out the airstrikes against facilities of Iranian-affiliated militants and other groups in Iraq and Syria, following the attack on the U.S. troops in Jordan on January 28th, in order to de-escalate the continued attacks by those groups. Japan is also aware that the United States does not seek a wider conflict in the Middle East or elsewhere, and acted on this basis. Madam President, tensions in the Middle East are already high, and situation on the ground is extremely volatile. The conflict in Gaza, which started on October 7th, has had serious ramifications across the region. In this context, Japan is deeply concerned that a number of non-state armed groups, militias, and terrorists have been launching attacks and have signaled that they will intensify their hostile activities. Those activities cannot be justified for any reason. We call upon all parties to refrain from any kind of destabilizing actions, such as the transfer of weapons, including missiles and UAVs, and other military-related technologies to such non-state actors. Madam President, no one wants to see a continuation of the cycle of violence and increasing civilian casualties. Japan remains committed to making every effort in close cooperation with fellow Council members and other key stakeholders to restore security and stability and find sustainable solutions that can stop the fighting in the region. Our world is at crossroads. We must choose the path toward peace, not war. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. S'agissant de la première réunion publique de ce mois, je vous assure du plein soutien de la Suisse pour votre présidence. Je tiens également à féliciter la France pour sa présidence réussie du mois dernier. Nous remercions la secrétaire générale adjointe Rosemary DiCarlo pour son intervention détaillant les développements dans la région. La Suisse est préoccupée par l'escalade en cours dans la région depuis le début des hostilités à Gaza et qui a atteint un point dangereux avec les événements de ces 10 derniers jours. Et ce, non seulement en Syrie et en Irak, mais aussi le long de la ligne bleue et en mer Rouge. Il existe dans la région un véritable risque pour la paix et la sécurité internationale. Nous appelons toutes les parties, ainsi que les acteurs ayant une influence sur elles, à faire preuve d'un maximum de retenue pour éviter une poursuite de l'escalade. Lorsqu'il s'agit de l'usage de la force, toute action doit être strictement conforme au droit international. De plus, tous les canaux de communication doivent être utilisés pour éviter des malentendus. Une seule erreur de calcul peut avoir des conséquences désastreuses. Il est indispensable de calmer la situation pour parvenir le plus rapidement possible à une désescalade au niveau régional. Seules des solutions politiques sont à même d'amener la paix et la sécurité dans l'ensemble de la région. En particulier, un cessez-le-feu humanitaire à Gaza est nécessaire. En Syrie, la Suisse rappelle que la résolution 2254 appelle à un cessez-le-feu au niveau national. Quant à l'Irak, la situation sera discutée demain quand elle est à l'ordre du jour de ce Conseil. Enfin, nous appelons toutes les parties à respecter le droit international, notamment le droit international humanitaire et les droits humains. Pour conclure, je souligne une fois de plus que ce Conseil doit jouer pleinement son rôle pour contribuer à une désescalade de la situation et à des solutions politiques aux conflits dans la région. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Madame la Présidente, je tiens tout d'abord à vous assurer le plein soutien de ma délégation pour votre présidence tout au long du mois de février. Je remercie Madame DiCarlo pour son intervention. La France est très préoccupée par l'escalade en cours au Moyen-Orient. Les frappes qui ont visé les militaires américains engagés dans la lutte contre Daesh à la frontière syro-jordanienne le 28 janvier sont inacceptables. Elles portent atteinte aux efforts collectifs contre ce groupe terroriste et elles menacent la stabilité de toute la région en alimentant l'escalade de la violence de façon préoccupante. La France les a condamnés, elle exprime sa pleine solidarité à l'égard des États-Unis, aux côtés desquels nous sommes engagés depuis 2014. Nous resterons pour lutter contre le fléau du terrorisme aux côtés des pays de la région. La France est engagée depuis 2014 dans la lutte contre Daesh, en particulier aux côtés de ses partenaires de la coalition internationale. En Irak, la France continuera à appuyer la lutte contre le terrorisme menée par les autorités irakiennes,
the Iraqi authorities' efforts to combat terrorism as long as they request that support in full respect of Iraqi sovereignty. We are committed to the security and stability of Iraq and of the autonomous region of Kurdistan within that country. We condemned the attack by armed drones against Kurdish forces' bases in December, as well as the strikes on the 15th of January in Erbil claimed by the IRGC. These actions are a violation of Iraqi sovereignty and must cease. In Syria, we are deeply concerned by the rise in violence on all fronts. The primary victims are civilians in the northeast and in the west, in particular in Idlib, as well as in the area controlled by the regime. These hostilities must cease in accordance with resolutions of this Council. There will be no possibility for a just and lasting solution in Syria until a credible and inclusive political process has been undertaken on the basis of Resolution 2254, adopted unanimously by this Council. France calls on all parties to show restraint in Iraq and in Syria. We must do everything possible to avoid a regional spillover. We must urgently seek out
together the means to ensure a sustained decline of tensions. Those with an influence on groups threatening stability in the region must use this influence to put an end to escalation and find the path to peace in the region, from Yemen to Lebanon, including Iraq and Syria. Iran has a serious responsibility in this regard. We continue to warn it about any regional attempts at escalation and would call on it immediately to cease its destabilizing activities. France will continue for its part to work to prevent a regional spillover. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Madam President, Mozambique thanks Guyana Presidency for convening this urgent meeting. We are grateful to Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, Under Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs, for her insights on this topic under consideration. Madam President, the situation in the Middle East has been addressed by this Council on many occasions. Today, we come here deeply concerned over the recent developments in the region that include military confrontations that threaten peace and security, not just in the region, but also in the entire world. The recent retaliatory attacks in Yemen, Syria, Iraq are such an example. They aggravate the current cycle of confrontation and war that already prevails in the region. These attacks are likely to escalate tensions with negative spillover effects in the entire Middle East and beyond. It is our view that at all times, member states are bound by the Charter of the United Nations that compels them to settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that peace and security and justice are not endangered. These attacks took place at a time when the USA, Qatar, Egypt were engaged in diplomatic contacts with the aim to end the devastating and the bloody war between Israel and Hamas. In this connection, we echo the UN Secretary General's viewpoint that as the hostilities between Israel and Hamas and other groups in Gaza intensify, there is a risk for further spillover of this conflict with devastating consequences to the entire region. Faced with mounting tensions in the Middle East, it is important for all parties involved to urgently de-escalate the tension, avoid armed confrontation, and engage in a meaningful, responsible, constructive dialogue and work towards peaceful long-term solution. We need to promote a solution that addresses the root causes of the prevailing conflict in the region. As Security Council, our mandate requires us to pull together our efforts in that direction by following the path of dialogue and diplomacy so as to achieve peace and stability in the region and in the world. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Guyana. I would like to thank USG DiCarlo for the information provided. We value the assessments of the UN and welcome the organization's continued monitoring of the situation. I also acknowledge the presence of the representatives of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Iraq, and the Syrian Arab Republic. My delegation is gravely concerned about the precarious situation prevailing in the Middle East and the potential for a wider regional conflagration. Such a risk must concern us all. Guyana condemns the attacks that resulted in the deaths of the 3 U.S. servicemen. We are concerned at reports of civilian losses in the response that has ensued. We consider it important that no effort be spared to avert new threats and provocations that could further inflame tensions in a region already besieged by conflict and a worsening humanitarian crisis. Guyana urges due caution in responding to these challenges. We call upon all parties to respect international law, including international humanitarian law and the principles of the United Nations Charter. We urge due respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. Guyana further considers that this Council must not relent in the search for solutions to the current security challenges in the region, not least the situation in Gaza, nor in efforts to avert a broader destabilizing regional conflict. In that regard, Guyana reiterates its call for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza, where unprecedented numbers of Palestinians have been killed since October 7th. The Council must unite to bring peace to Palestine and Israel and an end to this human tragedy. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا السيدة الرئيس.
Thank you, Madam President.
أود بداية أن أهنئكم
At the outset,
بانتخاب بلدكم
I would
الصديق
like to
غيانا
congratulate you on
لعضوية
Guyana's
مجلس الأمن
election as member of the
ورئاستكم
Security
لأعمال
Council
المجلس
and on the
لهذا الشهر.
presidency
ونتمنى
for
لكم
this
النجاح
month.
في هذه
We
المهمة.
wish you success in this endeavor.
ويتوجه وفد بلادي
My
بالشكر
delegation
للوفد الدائم
thanks
للاتحاد الروسي
the permanent
على
delegation
طلب
of the
عقد
Russian
هذه الجلسة
Federation
الطارئة
for requesting this
ردا على
urgent
العدوان
meeting
الخطير
in response
الذي
to
ارتكبته
the
الإدارة
vicious
الأمريكية
aggression
على
committed
أراضي
by the U.S.
الجمهورية العربية
administration
السورية
against the territories of the
وجمهورية
Syrian
العراق
Arab
الشقيق
Republic and the
فجر يوم
brotherly
السبت الماضي.
Republic of Iraq at dawn on
وما
Saturday.
يمثله هذا العدوان
This
من
aggression
تهديد للسلم
constitutes
والأمن
a threat to
الإقليميين
regional and
والدوليين
international peace and
وانتهاك
security
سافر
and a blatant
للقانون
violation
الدولي
of international
والقانون
law,
الدولي الإنساني
international humanitarian
ومبادئ
law,
ومقاصد
and the
الأمم
principles and
المتحدة
purposes of the
وهو
United
أمر
Nations.
يستدعي من مجلس الأمن
Therefore,
الإدانة
it
والشجع.
should be condemned and denounced by
السيدة
the Security
الرئيس،
Council. Madam
لقد أدى
President,
العدوان الأمريكي إلى
the
استشهاد
U.S. aggression
37
led
شخصا
to the martyrdom
بين
of
عسكريين
37
ومدنيين
civilians and military personnel
وإصابة 34 غيرهم
and seriously injured 34
بإصابات
others.
بالغة وتدمير عدة أبنية
It led to the
سكنية
destruction of
تقطن
several
فيها
civilian
العديد من
residential
العائلات
buildings,
ومبنى مدرسي
a school,
بالإضافة إلى إلحاق أضرار بالغة بالعديد من المنشآت والسيارات المدنية.
vehicles and facilities.
ولم تسلم المواقع التاريخية من هذا العدوان الذي استهدف أيضا قلعة الرحبة الأثرية. لقد استمعنا اليوم لنفس الحجج الواهية والادعاءات المضللة التي تروج لها الإدارة الأمريكية لمحاولة تبرير اعتداءاتها المتكررة بما في ذلك تقديمها تفسيرا مشوها لأحكام الميثاق وخاصة المادة 51 منه متجاهلة أنه لا يحق لمحتل ممارسة الدفاع عن النفس وأن الأسباب الجذرية لما تشهده منطقتنا من نزاعات ومعاناة وعدم استقرار مردها السياسات الخاطئة والهدامة للولايات المتحدة ودعمها الأعمى اللامحدود لكيان الاحتلال الإسرائيلي وجرائمه الوحشية بما فيها جريمة الإبادة الجماعية المتواصلة بحق الشعب الفلسطيني منذ ما يزيد عن 120 يوما واستثمارها في الإرهاب المتمثل بتنظيمي داعش وجبهة النصرة هيئة تحرير الشام وغيرهما من المجموعات الإرهابية والميليشيات الانفصالية ونشرها للفوضى والدمار. السيدة الرئيس، لقد حرصت حكومة بلادي
Through its statements and official letters, my government has been keen to urge the Security Council to uphold its responsibilities regarding the repeated acts of aggression and serious violations of international law committed by the United States against the sovereignty, unity, territorial integrity, and the independence of the Syrian Arab Republic.
فإنه لا يمكن لمداخلة أمام مجلسكم الموقر أن تحيط بكل تلك الانتهاكات. فالإدارات الأمريكية المتعاقبة استغلت مسؤولياتها كعضو دائم في مجلس الأمن وأمعنت بالتدخل في شؤون الدول الأخرى بما فيها بلاد سوريا وتشكيل التحالفات العسكرية اللاشرعية خارج مظلة الأمم المتحدة والشرعية الدولية وشن أعمال العدوان والاحتلال وممارسة الضغط والابتزاز ومعاقبة الشعوب وخنقها بالتدابير القسرية الانفرادية والحصار اللا إنساني واللا أخلاقي كل ذلك في تغليب لقانون القوة على حساب قوة القانون. وللأسف فقد عرقلت الإدارات الأمريكية المتعاقبة عمل مجلس الأمن وشلت قدرته على النهوض بالمسؤولية الأساسية التي أناطتها الدول الأعضاء به لحفظ السلم والأمن الدوليين وضمنت بذلك لوكلائها في منطقتنا وفي مقدمتهم سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي والتنظيمات والميليشيات الإرهابية مواصلة ارتكاب أبشع الجرائم والإفلات من أي عقاب. السيد الرئيس، ترفض الجمهورية العربية السورية جملة وتفصيلا كل الذرائع التي تحاول الإدارة الأمريكية استخدامها لتبرير عدوانها الذي لا يأتي إلا لهدف واحد هو حماية أدواتها في المنطقة بمن فيهم تنظيمي داعش وجبهة النصرة هيئة تحرير الشام والكيانات والمجموعات الإرهابية الأخرى والميليشيات الانفصالية التي ما كان لها أن تواصل جرائمها
These agents would not have continued their crimes against the Syrian people without the multifaceted support provided by the United States and its allies to them.
ترفض سوريا أيضا رفضا قاطعا أن تكون أراضي الدول الأعضاء ودماء أبنائها منصة لإطلاق الحملات الانتخابية الأمريكية واستعراض قوة الغاشمة في تقويض لقيم العدالة والقانون ومبدأ الأمن الجماعي الذي تأسست عليه منظمة الأمم المتحدة. تؤكد سوريا أن هذا العدوان الأمريكي الآثم الذي يتكامل مع الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية المتكررة على الأراضي السورية وجرائم التنظيمات الإرهابية والميليشيات الانفصالية لن يسمح عن مواصلة السعي وبكل السبل المشروعة لتحرير أراضيها كاملة من الوجود العسكري الأجنبي اللاشرعي والقضاء على الإرهاب وإعادة بسط سلطة الدولة وسيادة القانون وضمان أمن ورفاه الشعب السوري.
and to ensure the security and well-being of the Syrian people. In conclusion, Madam President, my country asks the U.S. administration to abandon its erroneous and destructive policies in the region and to end its illegal military presence on the Syrian territories. To end the suffering it is causing to Syrians as a result of its inhumane coercive measures, the plundering of national wealth, and the support it provides to terrorist organizations and separatist militias. My country also stresses that the U.S. administration must refrain from causing further escalation in our region at a time when the overwhelming majority of the UN member states are working to stop war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide that the Israeli occupation authorities are committing against the Palestinian people, as well as Israel's repeated attacks on the Syrian Arab Republic and other Arab territories. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Iraq.
شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the Security Council, first of all, I would like to congratulate Ambassador Caroline Rodriguez, permanent representative of Guyana, and congratulate her on the presidency this month. We'd like to thank France for their efforts last month as President of the Council. We would like to thank Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo also for her briefing during this session. We appreciate the call for a Security Council meeting to be held today at this specific time in the Middle East, because Iraq is aware that the crises in the Middle East are linked. We have already cautioned against escalation and said that the recent evolution of the situation could have grave repercussions and could undermine regional international peace and security. President Iraq, in its foreign policy, carries out a balanced policy on the basis of solid relations with the regional environment and also the international community to ensure its natural role as a leader in the region and around the world. This approach is reflected in the regional and international opening of Iraq. Over the last 2 years, Iraq has been working to become a source and a factor of stability in the regional and international context, and its relations with all states and states in the region should be balanced and on the based on the principles of good neighborliness, with mutual respect for interference and also non-interference in internal affairs and respect for sovereignty. We underscore the importance of not exporting domestic problems of states abroad, because this jeopardizes stability and security in the region and also jeopardizes its economic situation. Thus, Iraq, through its pragmatic diplomacy, has been able to bridge differences and ensure rapprochement between different positions in the region. President, Iraq is intermediately suffering from allied, friendly and neighbouring countries' attacks. It is surprising that relations between the Iraqi government and these states and their governments are being privileged. However, these attacks, which undermine Iraq's sovereignty, security and territories, are not in line with the nature and level of these relations. While we reaffirm our concern to protect and strengthen these bilateral relations, we condemn and categorically reject any attack against several areas in Iraqi territory, which have led to losses of human life as well as injuries amongst civilians, and it has damaged public and private property. And for futile and illogical pretexts, these attacks are violations of Iraqi sovereignty as well as territorial integrity, and it threatens its security and its people, and it runs counter to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. Iraq rejects all types of attacks against our military bases and will not allow anyone to impose a conflict that is ravaging the region too. We will not allow Iraqi territory to be used for score settling or for policies to be rolled out. President Iraq strongly condemns the American attacks which targeted military positions in Iraq on the 23rd of February, and which led to dozens of deaths and martyrs amongst personnel and civilians. This is a grave attack to official Iraqi security authorities, and this is a violation of Iraq's sovereignty as well as its security, and a transgression of the laws that govern relations between states. Lastly, we reiterate the importance for the Council to shoulder its responsibilities for maintaining international peace and security and to protect the sovereignty of states. and their territorial integrity, as well as to combat all violations and ensure the respect for the purposes and principles of the United Nations.
Iraq for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you. In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, Madam President, I would like to congratulate Guyana, the newly elected member of the Security Council, for its presidency this month. We acknowledge France for successful completion of its presidency in January. I would also like to extend my congratulations to the other elected members, Algeria, Sierra Leone, Republic of Korea, and Slovenia. We appreciate Russia's request for convening this meeting under the agenda item Threat to International Peace and Security, which addresses persistent violation of international law and the UN Charter by the United States in the region. We welcome the presence of Ms. DiCarlo and the Secretary General in this meeting. Madam President, Iran strongly condemns the U.S. military attacks on Syria and Iraq territory. The U.S. military action is illegal and unjustified and blatantly violate the basic norms and principles of international law and the United Nations Charter, particularly paragraph 4 of Article 2 of the Charter. It is also a flagrant breach of Iraq and Syria territorial integrity, sovereignty, and political independence. Iran also strongly condemns the joint military action of the United States and the United Kingdom against Yemen, which constitute an obvious violation of the United Nations Charters and international law. Furthermore, they have openly abused Security Council Resolution 2722. These illegal actions, which targeted civilians and vital infrastructure, jeopardize regional peace and security, as well as pose a serious threat to international peace and security. The US and UK must bear their international responsibility for their commission of the crime of aggression. The argument of justification invoking Article 51 as a basis for this aggression lacks a solid legal foundation and cannot legitimize these illegal actions. Madam President, today in this chamber, the US and UK made another desperate attempt to distract attention away from the root cause of the current situation in the region by falsely putting the finger and blame on Iran. It is regretful that the United States, a permanent member of the Security Council, has failed to fulfill its obligation under the UN Charter. The US expressed grave concern about the spillover of tension in the region while continuing to play a destabilizing role in the region. The United States continues to occupy Syrian territory, loot Syrian property and resources, and support separatist and terrorist groups. Furthermore, people in Syria are experiencing economic hardship and humanitarian crisis as a result of the United States' hostile and harmful actions, as well as the application of illegal sanctions. All these measures violate international law, the UN Charter, and related Security Council resolutions. The Syrian Arab Republic has officially and frequently raised objections to those violations, calling on the Security Council to halt these violations and put an end to the U.S. occupation. In Iraq, following the unlawful military intervention in 2003, the U.S. and the so-called coalition ignored Iraq's opinion and aspiration and continued illegal activities and presence under the guise of fighting terrorism. The United States and NATO must respect the Iraqi government's decision to terminate their military presence and withdraw their forces from the country. Madam President, all of the resistance groups in the region are independent, and their decisions and actions are motivated by their legitimate rights under international law that are ending the illegal presence of U.S. in their territories, stopping the genocide in Gaza, and ending the occupation of Palestinian territories. Therefore, any attempt to attribute these actions to Iran or its armed forces is misleading, baseless, and unacceptable. Iran never seeks to contribute to the spillover in the region. Iran has no military presence in Iraq, nor does it have bases or military advisors. In Syria, Iranian military advisors are legally present since they were invited officially by the Syrian governments to fight terrorism. Claims that Iran's bases in Iraq and Syria were attacked are rejected as unfounded and regarded as attempts to shift attention away from the U.S. aggressive actions. Iran has never sought to bring this dispute with the United States into Iraq territory and remains committed to Iraq's independence, national sovereignty, and territorial integrity, and this is the principal position of Islamic Republic of Iran. Madam President, it is evident to everyone that the root causes of the current situation in the region are occupation, aggression, and continued genocide and horrific atrocities committed by the Israeli regime and fully supported by the U.S. against innocent Palestinians in Gaza Strip and West Bank. The U.S. military attack against the Muslim nations of the region are the continuation of a complicity of this country in the genocide of the Palestinians through all-out support of the occupying regime and preventing any effective international action to hold the regime accountable. While more than 4 months have passed since the occupying regime's genocidal attacks on the oppressed people of Palestine, the U.S. has not only actively cooperated with the Israeli regime in the genocide of the Palestinians, but it's now attempting to divert the international community's attention away from the genocide of the Palestinians through a spillover and escalation of tension in other parts of the region. We believe that the only solution to end the conflict in the region and prevent the spillover of the war is to return all to their obligation under international law. That is, to force Israel to stop genocide in Gaza, to establish an immediate ceasefire to end the presence of U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria, and to exert pressure to end the occupation of Palestinian territory by the Israeli regime. Instead of blaming others and simply urging restraint from other members, the U.S. must force the Israeli regime to halt the genocide in Gaza and comply with its obligation under international humanitarian law. Likewise, the U.S. must end its obstruction of the UN Security Council to allow the adoption of the draft resolution proposed by Algeria, focusing on the ceasefire in Gaza. This approach aligns with the broader goal of restoring peace and stability in the region while addressing the humanitarian concerns at hand. Finally, Madam President, I would like to iterate that if Iran faces any threat, attack, or aggression affecting its security, national interest, or people, it will not hesitate to exercise its inherent rights under international law and the UN Charter to respond firmly. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Steakhouse has it.